Hello, sixth grade. Welcome back. Today, we actually have quite a bit to talk about. So, we're just going to go ahead and get started right off the bat here. We're going to be working in our notebooks. And as we've said over the last couple of days, we're going to be talking, or we've been talking about the Americas. And we're going to start focusing specifically now on things related to South America. Okay, so if you recognize any of this stuff we've done so far, the last couple of days, we built kind of this reference map, and then we talked about how people eventually migrated to North and South America. And what we're going to do now is we're going to focus on these early, well-known civilizations from Central and South America. And you've obviously heard of a lot of them before, like the Maya or the Aztec or the Inca. Okay, and we're going to spend the next couple of days focusing on each of those individually and then doing something with them, kind of combining together at the end. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get out of this, and I'm going to show you all how we're going to work this in with the notes. Okay, so I'm going to kind of park myself down here, and if you can tell, I have kind of a bucket of photos down here that we're going to look at. Okay, I'm going to pull them up when we need them, and I'm going to make them bigger when we talk about them. So I know they're super tiny right now, but they won't be when we need to talk about them during specific parts here. Okay, so like I said, I'm gonna move myself down here to the bottom. Let's go full screen on this thing. Okay, I'll even set myself aside here. Okay, so the first of these groups that we're going to talk about are the Mayans. Okay, and I know that a lot of people have at least heard of that term or who they are. And what we're going to do in the notebook today is we're going to add the basic information about just this one group. Okay, so over the next couple of days, we're going to talk about the Aztecs and the Incas as well. But the first couple of days here, we're going to focus on the Mayans and some of the things that they invented or kind of achieved. So, what you see over here on the side in the yellow is kind of the basic note structure. Okay, so you're going to want to have the notebook out by now, obviously, so we can start writing some of this stuff. But as always, I've left some gaps in between here because obviously we're going to talk about these things in a little bit of a greater detail, especially on some of these topics over here that have more information. So you're going to want to do the same thing, right? Leave some space, maybe jot down some things using bullet points. Pause this video, rewind it whenever you feel kind of the urge to. Okay, but this is definitely kind of the bare bones of everything that we're about to talk about. Okay, so let's get into kind of the first couple of basics. Who are we talking about today? Well, we're talking about the Mayan people. Okay. When did they live? Well, this is kind of tricky because actually Mayans still exist today. Obviously, the group became a lot smaller. The Mayan Empire eventually kind of died off, but the people still live and their ancestors still live in central Mexico, different parts of Central America today. So, again, all the Mayan people didn't necessarily die off in the 1500s, but their empire kind of came to an end. So let's look at this time frame. The 400s, so obviously this is an estimate, around the 400s BC, so about 400 years before the year zero, before Christ, all the way through the 1500s, which is in our modern time right now. It's AD. And a lot of people think it even goes beyond that. Like their empire didn't technically get defeated until even parts of the 1600s. So that's a long stretch there. That's a long stretch of basically 2,000 years for this one empire. Okay, now let's get into the where. And I'm going to bring this map up. And like I said, I'm going to make it bigger for our conversation here so we can talk about it. Okay, I'll move some of this other stuff out of the way. Okay, so where the Mayan people are specifically located is in the Yucatan Peninsula, which is part of Mexico. So let's jump over here to this map. And as you can tell from the color, little legend down here, the little key, the Mayan people are that pink color. So they would have lived mostly in this bottom part of Mexico, the modern day country of Mexico. is this whole outline right here, all the way down to the bottom of the pink. As you can see, the United States is up here with Florida and Texas. So the Yucatan Peninsula is the area of Mexico where the Mayans would have been located. Okay, so now that we know where we're at, let's start getting into some of the other details about their life and their religion, and kind of things that were going on during their time period. So I'm going to put this map away for now. Okay, let's talk about their economy. Economy is a tricky word because these days, obviously, it has everything to do with money and jobs. But back then, obviously, they weren't necessarily dealing with cash or coins or anything like that. But it's still things that they did to survive or to kind of help increase their wealth. So there are two things here. There's a specific type of farming that we want to talk about, and then obviously trade. Okay. The first thing about their economy with this farming is they did what's called slash and burn farming. Okay, so I'm going to bring a picture up here that kind of shows you the basics, and we're going to talk about what's going on with this. Okay, let's make it big. Here we go. So when you use slash and burn farming, the title kind of gives it away. You cut away or you slash different parts of a forest and then you burn all of the limbs and all of the leaves. Okay, now why would you do that? Well, the idea is that this area that you just burnt down, all of that burnt material will go into the soil and it will give it nutrients, and then you can use that area when you clear it out for farming. Okay, so that's the whole idea behind slash and burn. And even some people think that if you burn an area, it'll grow back even stronger, which is sometimes true. But you're going to see here later, once we get to the bottom, that slash and burn doesn't necessarily always benefit everybody. Okay, so they do use slash and burn farming. That's kind of a unique technique for them. And then they also traded with other groups. Okay, I don't want to call it other kingdoms or anything, but basically they traded within their empire with different people within the empire, different, we can call them city states, however you want to word it. But that's basically the backbone of their economy is this slash and burn farming and then trade. Okay. So we're going to switch gears here. We're going to talk about religion. All right. And for religion, I'm going to bring up a big picture of this temple. Okay. We're going to have this here for a second. So let's break down all the different parts of religion. Okay. First thing, the Mayan people were polytheistic. And if you've heard this term in my class before, you should remember that it means many gods or belief in many gods. Okay. Things like Christianity, Judaism, those are monotheistic because they only believe in one God. Poly means many. So polytheistic means that obviously they had multiple different gods for multiple different things. Now, did they have a few main gods and a few like lesser gods? Of course, but they did have multiple gods that they worship. Okay, now the reason that you see this picture is because in a lot of Mayan places, a lot of Mayan city states, or Mayan villages, you would see a pretty well built temple. And you can see the size of this thing. This is a modern day picture of Chichen Itza, which is a well known Mayan temple. And you can see the people down here in the picture. So that gives you kind of a size reference of how big this thing is. And you can tell that there's stairs that are going up the middle, and then they have these big kind of they look like stair step, but obviously they're a lot bigger than that. But just kind of this staggered pyramid. And at the very top of the temple is a room that was considered kind of where the gods live necessarily, or where the religious people would carry out their different religious ceremonies. So not necessarily the same as a church, but it can be seen as obviously a holy place, built clearly to represent kind of pointing up to the sky, obviously up to the heavens, up to the gods. So that kind of goes hand in hand. Now, one thing you see here, and you're going to see this unfortunately in a lot of different amounts, I guess I could call it, for the Aztec and the Maya and the Inca. But they believed in sacrifices quite a lot as kind of a gift to the gods. And we're talking about sacrifices, we're talking about animals and human. because they thought that blood, or the blood of an animal or a human, was the like strongest gift that you could give to the gods. So they did perform sacrifices of both animals and humans during different parts of the year, which I know seems crazy, but that is obviously a thing that all three of these major South American and Central American civilizations practiced for different reasons. Okay, so all this stuff goes along with the religion. Uh, that is, again, some of it is a little odd, but obviously it kind of just goes with the historical territory here. All right, we're going to put away this picture of the temple. And now we're going to talk about advancements. Okay, as you can see, there are quite a few. So we're just going to talk about a few of these Maya advancements. Okay, writing, a little bit of writing. I will show you these, what are known as glyphs. They're kind of just little squares of images, but if you notice within these squares, there are different parts that represented different things. Okay, so I wouldn't necessarily say that the Mayans had an alphabet, but they did have a form of writing. Okay, you can call them closer to hieroglyphics or different images that represent things. But in these glyphs, you can just see that there's multiple different parts that represented different things. Okay, so that's kind of an interesting form of writing. Mathematics. They don't necessarily have the easiest form of mathematics, and I know we've talked about different numbers and different mathematical numerals and different things with different groups, but these would be the digits for the Mayans, and they actually only have three symbols. They have a symbol for 0, which is a shell. They have a symbol for 1, which is a dot. So obviously, if you add 2 dot, 3 dot, 4 dot, and then they have a bar that represents 5. So if you go through these numbers 0 to 19, you notice that it's a combination of fives plus 1 or 2 or 4 or whatever it is. So you have the shell, the dot, and the bar. Once you got to number 20, what they would do is they'd have a placeholder. So they'd have like a dot, and then however many more you needed, it would be kind of similar to this. So it would be like a dot plus 1 for 21, and a dot plus 2 for 22, and so on and so forth. So as you can tell, it's not the most advanced number system we've never necessarily seen before, but it's pretty interesting, especially for back during their time period. Okay, so that's the math portion. Now, if we look back over here at the notes, they had quite a few advancements in astronomy, so the study of the planets and the stars. They invented, or were well known, I should say, I wouldn't say invented, but they're well known for these advanced ball courts. And these are pretty interesting. If you want to look at one real quick here, the ball court, in this case, you can tell from this modern day kind of renovated one, they would have the grass in the middle, and then it looks pretty much like a stadium up here. Okay, what you don't see on this one, but you still see in a lot of other ones, is a round circular hoop, okay, made of stone. And the way that they played the game that would have been played here is they had two teams, and they use their hips and their legs to kind of knock around the ball, not similar to soccer, but kind of the same concept. And they would try to knock that ball through the stone hoop. Now, the difference is with this game, it was a really serious situation. It was almost held as far as for religious purposes, and the winning team kind of represented the winning gods or the fate of the gods. So they were given many gifts and all kinds of different things if they won. And those that lost were actually given up as sacrifices or slaves. So if you lost the game, you didn't just lose the game, you might have lost your life, or at least at minimum been made a slave, because the idea was if you lost, it's almost like the gods willed it to happen, which again is pretty high stakes. Okay. So if we go back over to the notes, we got other things too, like they kind of invented what we call today modern day chocolate. And then the calendar, we're actually going to spend an entire assignment on this, but the Mayan calendar is actually one of the big speaking points here. And I'm just going to show you guys a preview. The Mayan calendar is very well known, and the reason for it is it's very accurate. Okay, and I'm not going to get into the deep water here today because we're going to do that over the next couple of days, talking about the calendar for them. But if you notice, there are three rings to this. So there's a ring here of 13, there's a ring here of 20, and there's a ring, you can't even see all of it, going all the way out here that has 365 spaces on it, which I'm sure you can probably figure out where we're going with that. Okay, but the Mayan calendar is very unique and it's very complex and it's very interesting for their time period. So we're going to spend some time on that tomorrow. Okay, but that's the advancements as far as we go right there. Okay, so to wrap this up at the bottom here, I'm gonna move myself towards the middle because we don't need this space anymore. Okay, let's talk about the downfall of the Mayans, and we'll do this real quick. The downfall, obviously, is how did the empire eventually kind of taper off or come to an end? Let's just be real. For the Mayans, historians don't necessarily know if it was just one thing or if it was actually a combination of several things. Okay, so one of the theories is that using that slash and burn technique led to a lot of erosion. So instead of it adding nutrients to the ground, a lot of people think that after they did it several times, it just eroded away all the good soil and it eroded and kind of washed away all of the nutrients that would be needed for good farming. And therein, because that land started to erode away and it really couldn't hold moisture, they were more prone to having droughts. So they were more prone to having dried up land or dried up crops. So what they thought, and again, it's not the worst idea because it does work in some capacity, but just not long term. Okay, because you have to eventually rotate crops or move around so that the soil has a chance to kind of bounce back. So again, that's why I put these arrows here because it's like the slash and burn pretty much led to a lot of erosion, and that erosion of the soil, that breakdown of the soil eventually led to a lot of dryness and drought. Okay, so that's one theory about the downfall. Another one is conflict. This is kind of an interesting take, but a lot of people, historians included, feel like the Mayans got into a lot of arguments within their own empire and or neighboring empires, and some of it had to do with sacrifices, believe it or not, and drought, which is crazy. So to put this together, here's kind of the vicious cycle. Here's kind of what happens. The Mayans in some of these places believed that the drought was a result of the gods being angry at them. So, in order to appease the gods, they wanted to perform more sacrifices, more human sacrifices. So, in order to get more people for the sacrifice, they would get into battles, they would get into conflicts with their neighboring enemies. So, it was kind of this cycle of they thought the gods were mad at them, so they had to keep going to war so that they get more sacrifices so that they could maybe turn things around with the gods and the gods would possibly send them rain. So obviously, it was kind of a crazy situation. So conflict is another theory with the downfall. And last, we know for a fact that when Europeans start showing up in North and South America, they're clearly coming over here to take over land and try to find gold and different things. And the Spanish, in particular, people from Spain, the conquistadors or the conquerors, they're going to have a huge deal to do with that. So around the year 1517 is when the Mayans are kind of interacting with the Spanish invaders, these people from Spain. So any number of these things could have led to the downfall of this particular group. Okay. So again, as far as today and the assignment part, all I need to see from you all is obviously that you've put some effort into writing our notes here. Obviously, I'd like to see a little bit more than what's on here, but at least, the bare minimum and you being able to kind of keep up with all the stuff we've talked about is going to be helpful. And as I said before, we're going to use this information here coming up over the next several days to put them all together and do something with it. But for now, that's going to wrap it up. Okay. Make sure if you're typing these out on a Google document, you just share them to my email. So if you've been typing your notes and that's just quicker for you, that's fine. then you can just share them with me as proof that you paid attention and wrote all these down. Same thing with notebook pages. If all you want to do is obviously write the notes, and obviously I've left some space here for some of the things we discussed, but make sure you shoot me a picture of that via email, and then we'll be square as far as points for the day. All right. So hope everybody's hanging in there. Hope everybody's being well and staying safe. And as always, I'll talk to you all really soon about obviously more stuff related to these groups. All right. See ya.